Well, everyone, it's time for us to go ahead and take a look at the Samsung Galaxy Z Flip 3 and see how this phone holds up in 2022. Now, this phone, in my opinion, is still completely worth it. It's not that old of a phone, and it's still a very capable machine when it comes down to it. Now, is it the first phone I would recommend this year? Well, it really kind of depends. I've always been kind of iffy on the whole entire Flip lineup, mostly because there's really not a coherent reason why you'd want to pick up this phone over something like the S series of that year, considering they're usually around the same price as well. We're right around the corner of the Z Flip 4 coming out as well. So whether it comes out on the, August 10th event, which should be 2 days from now, or if it comes out like 3 weeks from now or a month from now, you are better off waiting until the next Z Flip comes out than buying one of these things, when they go down a lot more in the used market, or even potentially buying something like a Galaxy S22 that probably will also go down in the used market, probably a little bit of time too. So that probably makes a little bit more sense. But regardless, a phone like the Galaxy Z Flip, if you want to buy it, links will be down in the description. You can get it from there. You can help support the channel at the same time. But the Z Flip is a very interesting phone because it has a mechanism that pretty much no other phones or very few phones have. It's that folding, type of architecture. Now, I think this type of phone screen, and I think the whole entire thing this phone has going for it, is probably the future of phones. I think, personally, I said this a few years ago as well, Samsung is currently trying their hardest to make sure that the Z Flip complete lineup, the way the screen folds, everything along those lines, they are trying their hardest to make sure that they are the frontiers, that they are the best of the best when developing these types of panels. So then by the time, Apple goes ahead and wants to start implementing folding phones, which they are going to do at some point, they can go ahead and source panels from Samsung, who's already been doing it for so many years. So this is a long-term play from Samsung, I think, and it starts with the Z Fold and the Z Flip, but it's going to go on to even bigger and better folding phones as well. The front of the Z Flip 3 has a 6.7-inch foldable dynamic AMOLED display. And it's a Super AMOLED display too that's on the front, which it has a little bit of a 1.9-inch panel. Now, the front display is kind of whatever. Not really many people are going to interact with it too much, especially if you end up buying some sort of Galaxy Watch or Apple Watch. You're really not going to be spending too much time on the front display, but it's still very nice to have. That, actual display on this thing when you're unfolding it, it's a really decent panel. For some reason, outdoors, as you can probably see with the way I filmed it, it really doesn't look too good, which is very interesting. Most of the time I film a Galaxy or I film a Samsung, or I film, a OnePlus, or I film an iPhone outside. It usually films fine. I don't know why this time around it wasn't working too well, but it's totally okay. Probably could be due to the panel itself. Now, the panel is actually decent. There's not a lot of bezel around it. There is that little crease in the center, which I'm hoping Samsung still improves on and fixes by their next couple Galaxies that they end up making in the Flip lineup. But I think it's a good display. But like I said, you're buying this phone mostly because of that flipping and folding architecture. And personally, I think it's a really cool thing. I'm still not super used to folding it and unfolding it. I don't think I'll really ever be used to it, to be honest, but I don't really feel like it's a cheap mechanism. And I will say, after using it a couple times, you do get used to having it folding and unfolding. And I think Samsung has learned from the previous folds and flips, disastrous kind of things that have happened. I think they're trying to make these as stable of phones as possible, and they want these things to line up, forever. Now, this thing has a USB Type-C port on the bottom, no expandable storage, nothing like that. And on the back, we have a frosted glass pack, which actually feels really good in the hand. This phone feels kind of in line with something like a Galaxy S22. So it feels very good. It does not feel cheap at all for the most part, and I'm actually really happy about that. You also have a dual camera setup on this thing too, which is honestly very interesting, and we'll go ahead and pretty much hit on that right now. But I want to kind of recap the whole entire body by saying this is a very interesting phone with a very interesting design. There are lots of advantages of having a phone like something like the Galaxy Fold or even the Flip. When I was flipping this thing and I put it in my pocket, I didn't really have to worry about the screen, being scratched up or anything like that. It does have a cover display, but it's not nearly as big of a display, or even if it cracks or if it breaks, I don't really care too much about the cover display. I'm glad that the internal display is always there and pretty much in always good condition. Now, the camera cycle, this is where I start looking at phones like the Galaxy S21 and the Galaxy S22 as overall better phones in my opinion. With the Z Flip, we do have a 12 megapixel wide angle lens and then a 12 megapixel ultra wide sensor. And on the front, we have a 10 megapixel wide angle lens. Now, there are some really big things to keep in mind. Even when compared to a Galaxy S21 of last year, you are having one less lens. you are missing that telephoto lens compared to the S21. You also do not have 8K capability on the back of this camera, but you also do not have 4K at 60 on the front of this camera either. Now, coming from the previous flips, I think it's actually been a pretty big, upgrade, and I'm glad they're moving in that direction. But again, do not get it confused that this phone is, a tremendous successor or even a competitor against the S22. If you don't really care about that flipping mechanism, then I would highly recommend buying an S21 or a Galaxy S22 over this device. Now, I will say the camera and features, everything built in, are perfectly good. I love being able to go ahead and utilize all those little tiny features that a majority of these phones have. But as I mentioned before, you do not want to be in a situation where you want to film in 8K videos or you want to film 4K at 60 on the front. And for those things, you might want to go and, maybe move towards something like a Galaxy S22 or S21. To give you some perspective, the Galaxy S10 of 2019 could actually go and film 4K at 60 on the front and the back. This one doesn't have it, but it's not as crazy of a big deal. You still have the ultra-wide lens. You still have a pretty decent camera with a lot of features built in. So in terms of that kind of covers it up there. Now, in terms of performance, this device has that Qualcomm Snapdragon 888 chipset inside with 8GB of RAM built in inside of it as well. Now, as I mentioned before, this type of phone's performance is pretty much exactly what you'd expect from a Galaxy S21. So this thing has about a year-old chipset inside, and I will say from everything that I've seen and everything that I've tested personally, the Snapdragon 8 Gen 1 chipset, which is the current one that's pretty much in all these phones, is top tier. It is probably a really big upgrade coming from the Galaxy S, from the S21 chipset and this chipset as well. Now, I only say that to say the Z Flip 4, like I said before, is right around the corner. So if you're not in a rush to buy this phone, you may want to wait until the next Z Flip comes out, which is pretty much guaranteed to have that 8 Gen 1 chipset inside. But even this chipset itself is a really good performing chipset. I've used many different phones, including this one, with this type of chipset, and realistically, no matter what you do with it, you're going to be getting a solid experience. It's definitely not going to be the fastest performing phone of all time, but I think this is a phone that I would recommend buying if you really like this type of design. Otherwise, there are phones out there in the used market and even in the new market that will rival this thing with performance. And I will also say there's phones with more RAM than this thing. There's obviously the S22 Ultras and even the Galaxy S21 Ultra that you can probably buy in the used market that is miles above this phone as well. So when it comes down to the performance of this thing, definitely still a very good performing phone. It's probably not the first phone I would recommend looking at if you're trying to get the best performance right now, but it's still a very good phone that came out, last year that is still holding up very well in the performance segment as well. Now, this phone also, in terms of longevity, is still going to be here for a few years. It's definitely not going anywhere in terms of the, longevity of this phone. It's definitely, I don't think it's going to last as long as the Galaxy S22s. It's pretty much expected there. It's going to last pretty much in line with the Galaxy S21s and the Galaxy Z Fold of last year. So, like I said, keep that in mind if you're wanting to get the fastest phone of all time with the longest support, as of right now. This is probably not the phone, but it's not too far off from there either. So, this also leads me into the battery life, which is a 3300 mAh battery inside of this. We do have wireless charging and reverse wireless charging, which is really good. But as I mentioned before, it does kind of have a small size battery to how big and powerful this phone is. So, like I said, 6.7-inch display is pretty big for the most part, but it isn't like the craziest highest resolution, so that might be something to keep in mind as well. It's a 1080p panel, but I will say with something like this, you may want to get a bigger size battery when it comes down to it. So it's not a bad battery life, but that is kind of one of the things to keep in mind as well. So in terms of everything, and to kind of sum up this video, I think the Galaxy Z Flip 3 is still a very capable phone. I still think it has a lot of power within it. Would it be the first phone I would recommend buying? Like I said, no, I don't think this would be the first phone I'd recommend, but I think this is still a very good phone if you want the mechanism of folding, and if you don't really care about the Z Flip 4 or the next one's coming out, then I would say go for it. But I would also recommend waiting until the next ones come out and kind of see what happens there. So that kind of covers it up. If you have any other thoughts or questions, please let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.